I'd like to call the meeting of the Sewer Negotiating Committee. Today, I'd like to thank everyone for being here. First of all, I want to say that anyone that's interested in public comment, they could get with Ms. Jenny, fill out a form, and submit your public comment. At this particular time, I'm going to ask Mr. Robert to lead us in the invocation and the pledge.
Dear God, thank you for bringing us men and women here together to negotiate a better future for Ascension Parish. Thank you for keeping us and our families safe. We persevere through this COVID. And Lord, please have your presence amongst this meeting tonight so we get a lot accomplished. In your name, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilman Robert. There are no chairs additions to the agenda tonight. I've already stated about public comments. I need to get a motion to approve the minutes of our last meeting.
Motion.
Okay, motion by Mr. Robert, second by Mr. Wagaspat. And I need to make sure that since the name tags are not in the front, to ensure that all members are present. Councilwoman Cazzo, Councilman Robert, John Diaz, Councilman Wagaspat, and myself. The only member that's missing tonight is Councilman Ogeron. Okay, first on the agenda tonight is an update from our attorneys, Zeal, Sash, and Wilson. I see we have Mr. Fleshman and Mr. Hardy here in the audience with us. So, gentlemen, however you would like to start with that, we would like to receive that update.
Good evening. As I know many of y'all were present for the Utilities Committee meeting last week, where we gave a brief update. There has not been much change, if any change, from that meeting. But essentially, we had a meeting with the Ascension Sewer team and several representatives of this committee meet on a video conference where there was a lot of positive discussion about several items that was included in an email to this committee, updating you on those items: name change, approval of a transfer from AWT to the new entity, and it ended with a promise from Ascension Sewer to provide to us their proposal. That was, I guess now, 2 weeks ago, the 12th, I believe, of May 12th, I think, is when they said they were going to send us a proposal. They did not send us the proposal. We subsequently learned that they were requesting additional information, engineering, financial information based on the administration's alternative plan. That's kind of where things are. We have not spoken with Ascension Sewer since the last meeting. We've not heard from them. We've not received anything from them in terms of any additional requests. They were present here. There was discussion about making a public records request, but they certainly, if they've made one, they didn't submit it through us. So that's, pending any questions that you have, there's really not much to update this committee on that it wasn't updated last utility committee meeting.
Mr. Robert.
Yes, sir. Last utilities meeting this past week, there was some information shared that I was not privy to. That was, at one point in time, did the negotiating committee ask for Bernhardt to study any opposing plans? And the reason I know that is because I would never agree to that. I mean, it's kind of like, I want to see everybody else's bid so I can bid $1 less and get the plan. So when did that happen, and did that happen?
So there was there was no request for them to review the administration's alternative plan on our video conference at all.
What about at any other point in time?
Not that we're aware of. I mean, they were not, they were not asked, certainly at the meeting. The only conversations we've had with Ascension Sewer was on that conference call. We were waiting to get their proposal.
Are you aware of any other conversations that you weren't involved in?
I'm not aware of any conversations.
Okay.
But, that's it's up to certain council members. But the thing that was presented here by Ascension Sewer at the utility committee meeting was that it was requested by members on that April 30th video conference to kind of scope out, to kind of come up with an analysis of the administration's plan. On the 30th, there was no administration alternative plan, and that was part of the reason that they gave us for a delay in providing their proposal, was that the day before it was due, the administration issued an alternative plan, and they wanted some time to really understand and study that. So what was requested at that video conference was certain information about the parish's system, the number of customers, and kind of the financial analysis of kind of the do-nothing.
A request from them upon us?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
that's
that was
fine.
provided,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
provided to them. So, it was not requested by this committee, the representatives on this committee, that they provide some analysis of
Nor
the
anyone else.
administration's alternative plan.
Yeah, nor anyone else. Because you said it on the committee, so,
Not,
None of y'all-
certainly not that we're aware of.
okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Comment if I may.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
I don't really recall if anybody asked. So, I mean, I would own that if I thought I had asked. I mean, I think I said to Clint the other night, I mean, I could have asked them. I could have said, would you analyze any alternative plan? I just don't recall the specifics. So I would really like for us, anytime we have those kind of calls, that we have really good, concise minute taking, so that we would not have this issue of whether, and if that happened, then are we absolutely sure that I or no one else asked? Would you tell us if there was some alternative plan? Would you do an analysis of that? Do we know exactly whether or not that was said?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I tend to get to the bottom line maybe a little too quick occasionally, but
That's okay.
I can categorically tell you that request was not made. Now, whether or
Okay,
not
good.
it was made somewhere else or outside, Mr. Councilman, I can't attest to that. The only thing I can attest to is what happens on the calls or where I am present. And that was not made. In fact, there was no alternative plan at that time to have them critique. Now, is this something that appears they'd like to do? Yes. Did they request other information? Yes. Did they say they wanted engineering and financial information? Yes, they said that on that call. But there was no request on that call. And we did take precise notes, and those notes are reflected in the sort of status report and the recap of that meeting that you all got. That was thorough. I don't think that left out anything that happened on that call. So honestly, I don't know. You said that we need something better in the future. With all due respect, Madam Chair, I think that those minutes reflect exactly what happened.
Well, I'm really glad to know that, because I was puzzled. I really couldn't, look, there was a lot going on, lots of people on the screens. I couldn't remember if myself or someone else had specifically asked that question. I truly could not recall.
No,
I think I
in
said that to
fact,
Clint.
to be, again, blunt with this committee, that's not something that council would have done without getting some kind of guidance from this committee. We don't feel like we have the authority to give those kinds of directives.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but when a lot of big conversations going on, a lot of things happen.
Hey, Ms. Robert?
I guess we're just considering the circumstances. Do we need to make a point to contact them through y'all and say, look, we did not make this request, and we retract any intentions that you got of it? Because, I mean, I don't want them, it's kind of one of those things, we don't want to have them look at other plans before they bid against them. You know, or if that's the case, we need to vote on it.
Well, I think in the last council meeting, the last utilities meeting, the question came up as to whether or not they're entitled to any information, if it exists. And I think it was stated pretty clear that if they would like to do a public records request, that's up to them. But I just want to make it clear, at no time during that call did the committee, did council ask that they do any kind of critique of any alternative plan by the parish.
So there would be no need to retract anything since it didn't happen.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Thank
That is my view.
Mr. President?
And I think this is probably where we get into a lot of the confusion, and I think I'm hopeful that we can clean it up. So we have a negotiating committee that had discussed that this committee was gonna negotiate. And then there we were talking about negotiations in a utility committee meeting. And then I witnessed personally Bernhardt having lunch with a councilman, which is in violation of what this committee ruled, as that all communications would go through the attorney. So what I'm hoping to happen here is that we clean this up, talk about where we're moving forward in these negotiations, because there seems to be too much confusion about too many things happening at this committee over here and this committee over here and this meeting. We need a directive, and we need to hold all parties to it. That's my hope. That's my hope we can get there, because this is where we get into these situations where this happened, or this in this meeting, this happened. If we want this sewer committee to negotiate, then let's keep those negotiations within this committee. If we're gonna make it public, and we're gonna have all our discussions publicly made, then we need to do that. But then everything's public. Opinions, ideas, negotiations, because it is. It doesn't seem, based on the legal opinion, that we're able to go in executive session with this committee. So now all negotiations are public. Again, I'll let you comment on that. So I'm hopeful that this committee can decide where we're going in the future with these negotiations, because it was very murky. And this is where we get in these situations where this might have been said and this wasn't said, and we're not real sure. So I'm hoping to clean this up for the public as well as for us in how we move forward. That's all I have.
Yeah, Councilman Oldron. I'm sorry, Wagaspat. Sorry.
Good Lord.
No, you can punch me after
You
the
need to
meeting.
apologize.
I guess
to
this
Councilwoman
question is
Brown.
for both of you. So we, of course, weren't here when the cooperative endeavor agreement had come about. So my understanding of that agreement is that it's cooperative, right? It was something that was supposed to be something together with Bernhard and with the parish, correct?
I do want to make it clear. I think you're correct, but we did not play any role in the development of that CEA.
Well, that's fine. No, I'm just discussing it, so just so I understand it. So, being that we have new members, we have a new council, I mean, do you believe that we are still in a position where we are actually pursuing that cooperative endeavor agreement, or should that be revisited? It feels like these conversations the last couple of weeks are almost counterintuitive to what that agreement meant, and we were not a part of doing that. So, I mean, do we feel like we're moving towards that? I mean, that's just an open question to this council, or...
I don't, with all due respect, Ms. Council, I don't think that's a legal question.
Okay.
I think it's something that you will take a look at and determine whether or not you think there's progress being made. If it's not, we're at your whim. We represent you. We'll do whatever it is you need us to do. But I'm hesitant to pass judgment as a lawyer on whether or not these discussions are going in the direction that you want them to go.
Hi, Ms. Castle, and then you, Mr. Robert.
Just for the help of the new ones, what's the length of term of that cooperative endeavor agreement?
Yeah, so the term is, it ends 2 years after it was made. So, let me see, I think it was May 20th, 2021 is when it will, the term will expire. So next May, a year from now. And to follow up on the initial question, the scope of the CEA is to negotiate an agreement with the district to construct, manage, operate, and maintain the system. So, and like Tim said, where we are in that, I still think we are operating under an agreement to negotiate. That's the purpose of the system, which is some larger components. But in terms of progress and where those conversations are, that was the only exclusive right that was granted to them, was the exclusive right to negotiate an agreement with the district.
Okay.
Is that
Mr. Robert?
One point I do want to make, as far as all of these negotiations being public, it brings back to mind the other side of the coin. So would it be fair for us to say that we should attend or have all of Bernhardt's meetings public? And no, that's no. Because when you negotiate a deal, you can't do that. I'm not saying we don't need to make all of the decisions that we make public, because I think we should, but discussing amongst one another to negotiate, that's like cheating on a test with your answer key right there. I mean, they can literally watch us on TV right now and see what we're negotiating. I think that needs to be looked at and visited, because I'm good with announcing everything we're doing, but I'm not good with having all these negotiations in public.
Mr. President?
Again, and this is just for this committee to ponder, okay? Because this is an event of fact that happened. So on the January 23rd, 2020 council meeting, there was a motion made by Councilman Ogeron to refer the consideration of the construction, operation, and cooperative endeavor agreement between ACUD2 and Ascension Parish LLC back to the Utilities Committee for future review and analysis. This motion was seconded by Councilman Joe Robert. Councilman Aaron Lawler made an amended motion to include asking the administration to take the lead in setting up meetings with the public and to work with the council with negotiations moving forward. This amended motion was seconded by Councilman John Cagnalotti. There was no objections to the amended motion. This amended motion passed. So we have something that the council has voted on with guidance here that we have strayed away from. And the question is, if we did, shouldn't we have gone back to the council and had them amend that motion again? So I'm a little confused on where we're going with all this when this happened at the January 23rd, 2020 council meeting and was voted by the entire council. So it's just something for us to ponder, look at, and discuss.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions on the current agenda item? And as we go down through here, we have a couple more things that probably will assist us in moving forward with a decision on how we do move forward with this particular committee. So agenda item 7 says that it's an explanation and discussion on utilization of executive session. Parish President mentioned that a little bit, and I think, do we have that in the packet, Denny? Did you give that? Talking with our council, our parish council, basically he stated that we could not have executive sessions in dealing with this negotiating committee. Of course, one of the pertinent parts of doing this was the fact that we possibly could have executive sessions and have discussions coming through our attorneys. The goal was to have all communications to come from this committee to our attorneys, and in executive session we will discuss it. The idea was to be fair with whoever is presenting a plan, because if I was a company, I wouldn't want my negotiating strategies or the things I'm talking about to be aired in a public session. I think that was sensitive to everybody on the committee. That's why we decided to move in that particular direction. But as is stated, as you see by the email that Mr. Parrington sent me, that was something that we cannot continue to do. So with that, I'll just kind of open the discussion. I see Mr. Robert's hand up.
Well, it's kind of odd that we're just now finding out that we can't do that. I say, do we need to get an AG's opinion? I mean, what do we do? Do we just follow that? Or how are we supposed to move forward, and why was it in violation before? Why did we do it before?
Well, I'm not an attorney. That's a good question. Okay, so if Mr. Hardy could assist us with that.
The general rule is that executive session, first of all, has to be noticed, and a couple of reasons that I'm aware of, and I don't claim to be an expert, is that personnel issues, matters, and matters that are in anticipation of litigation, actual litigation, or if litigation appears to be imminent. And I think the challenge is, I don't think there's been a threat of a lawsuit. There's not been a notice. So maybe I think that's what Mr. Parrington is relying upon, because the reasons to go into executive session are fairly narrow. That does not mean that a public body cannot have outside counsel that talks to outside counsel on the other side. I mean, that's not prevented. And that's not anything necessarily in public, because you don't have necessarily a quorum of the council there, and that can take place. The only question is, can we go into a session, a closed session, with your lawyers and discuss a matter that's neither personnel nor in anticipation of litigation or actual litigation? That's the only question. But there's nothing to prevent lawyers from talking to lawyers, and then us at some point, apparently when we get to a certain point, surprising the council courts of where things are, the status of where things are. That doesn't necessarily mean we expose strategy and that sort of thing. That's my view.
Thank you. Is there any questions?
So I have a question.
Good. Mr. Diaz?
So, Mr. Hardy, when we get, or when and if we get their next plan, will that be proprietary? Well, then all this, seems like to me as I read it, it's now that all the negotiating and the documents are in the public.
No, if we get another plan and ultimately goes to the council, arguably that's a public document.
Mr. President?
So the meetings that were handled by specific council members prior to me taking office was because the administration had initiated a committee, therefore allowing them to have meetings that weren't in the public. Because there were several meetings before the plan ever got to the public. And so they went back and forth. So I guess my question is, did that occur because the administration was leading the negotiations?
The best answer I can give you, Mr. President, that's a part of it, but I think during those earlier discussions about a plan, we're very careful to make sure there was never a quorum. Different council people wanted to be involved in the process. I think there was an attempt to let them know because everybody was interested, but we were very, very clear in that in terms of sunshine, we could not have meetings that violated open meetings, and so we were very careful to avoid that.
Mr. Robert?
We're not at quorum of the council or have been at any of our executive session for the sewer negotiating committee as of now, are we, or have we?
No.
Okay, so there's no difference there. I'm just wondering why wouldn't that apply now, because we don't have a quorum of the council?
Because the question was executive session. Executive session is for the entire council.
Well, okay, so we just weren't ever in executive session because we didn't have the entire council in that.
So I think part of the difference is I think this is a committee that has been set up. So it's a quorum of this council is the question. So where there was not a public meeting
Okay, so you're
with
saying
a couple members of the council.
there was no meetings with the quorum of this particular committee in the past, or the whole council?
There technically wasn't a committee in the past. It was several meetings with council, with limited number of council members to update them on the status of where the contract is.
So it was the lack of a committee that allowed us to do it before?
Well,
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's right.
there was no committee.
So do we need to explore maybe not having a committee?
Well, I think that's the discussion when we start going through our processes, establishment of a process. Because just to be clear, this committee was set up as a subcommittee of the utility committee for the purpose of it. Once a standing committee sets a subcommittee, then it applies to all of the of the rules and regulations for open meetings. So that's why. As Mr. Hardy is saying, previous discussion to inform the council were meetings that were had with members of the council that did not constitute a quorum. Those that were interested, we had meetings that didn't constitute a quorum. So that's how it was done in the past last year and in the other discussions.
And let me make clear, we're not recommending that you do it one way or the other. The only thing that we will always do is try to make recommendations to you that keeps us legal and does what the law requires.
Thank you, sir. Any other question on this agenda item? Comments? Good. Okay, next agenda item is to discuss and establish a process for negotiation with the Ascension wastewater on wastewater treatment system. So this is a concern because one thing I wanted to do, the goal that I was tasked with was to work at getting a proposal to this committee to consider. The process was initially established that we would have executive session to discuss that proposal with the assistance of our attorneys, and our attorney would be the ones that would go and present our concerns, get answers, and come back to this committee for consideration as we move forward. To get to a point that a proposal would go to the utility committee definitely the utility committee, but definitely go to a council for consideration if it got to a point that all of the situation could be considered and there was an agreement to move forward. It looks like that now we have to have some discussion in the process, and this has already been brought up, that since we can't go into executive session, can this committee really do what they need to do without having the ability to do so? So I'll open up for discussion. Ms. Terry?
Well, I'm perfectly willing to make a motion that we disband this committee.
I'll make a second.
But I would like to elaborate that I think that the reason it was set up was to ensure that we would be compliant with the CEA. There was not any interest expressed on the part of the administration to comply with the CEA. And the council had serious concerns that were we to violate that CEA, we would be, we would have legal liability. So while I'm willing to make a motion, and I've already heard a second, to disband, I still want to have an understanding of how we would prevent the violation of a CEA and the lack of good faith negotiations with a partner to which we are obligated until May 20th of 2021. And I will remind everyone in my listening ear that a CEA is a cooperative endeavor agreement, which means that we would cooperate, them with us and us with them. So I think that while I'm willing to make that motion and already have a second, I want to make it clear that it is important that we honor this cooperative endeavor agreement into which we entered.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Mr. Joel?
I couldn't agree anymore. Absolutely do want to make sure we go about in a way that we do honor the cooperative endeavor agreement. I think that possibly it would be more so cooperative by being able to reciprocate the negotiations they can have, meaning negotiations in private. I don't want to do anything against the cooperative endeavor agreement. I mean, I want to review their plan. That's what it's all about. With that said, you were saying before that in the previous times there was not a committee. It was just less than a quorum of the council. So could we do the same type deal? Can we have less than a quorum consistent with the same people in this committee?
No, let me answer that. There's no reason that we can't do that. It's what the council would think is the most prudent way, an organized way to do it. If that is to be done, it's possible, but I think we want to make it clear and make it clear to all the council people how it'll be done and make sure all of them are satisfied with it. What we don't want is for individual council people to think others have had more involvement maybe than they have had more opportunity. And that's just an editorial on my part.
Now,
Go ahead.
that brings up the question as to, I can imagine 11 people inside the room
Well,
negotiating.
you
No,
can't.
we can't do
Yeah,
that.
No, you can't.
I'm completely okay with sharing with the public the outcome of the meetings and sharing everything that they share to continue the cooperative endeavor agreement. I guess I just want to bring up, in light of kind of what you were saying, Chairwoman Terry, is I do want to honor it. But in the same token, I don't want to put ourselves at a disadvantage by having to adhere by rules that they do not also have to adhere by.
Well, I make a suggestion, just to give some history on what we did when we had a pretty significant item to consider as an administration and a council. When we did with the, I guess we were talking about the flood issues, and we were talking about how much field that you had that you needed to have. That was a committee that was set up, an administrative committee that consisted of, if I'm not mistaken, I know it wasn't a quorum, but it may have been 4 council members that participated, along with administration, along with planning and zoning, along with engineering company, even along with members of the public that came in and gave comments and suggestions. It was a lot of work because we had several very long meetings to discuss all the issues and came up with a solution that was presented to the council after a document and a review was done, and that particular committee felt comfortable with moving forward. In that way, we can still honor the nature of the cooperative endeavor agreement, and when there is a proposal that is submitted, it can still go to that particular group of an administrative committee. And secondly, it's not a committee that's set up by the council or a established committee of the council. It worked very well. Chairwoman Casso was a member of that, and I think she can attest to the long discussions that were had, some disagreements, but it still led us to come to something that could be presented to the council and pass. So with that, Ms. Terry?
I would like to add that while I thought that was a very effective administrative committee, there was a cooperative administration. There were cooperative members of the council. And in the light of that, we still took unbelievable criticism for having done it. I could go back and quote articles out of news organizations, or so-called news organizations, and Facebook articles, and the people who participated in this process were excoriated and accused of all sorts of wrongdoing when none was happening. So I would caution anybody who agrees to sit on the next one, if that were the decision of this body, that you're going to have to take an unbelievable amount of criticism, if all is fair in the media, for having agreed to participate, because the group was excoriated. I think that I'm not exaggerating. And even amongst the council, there were people who didn't appreciate it, who didn't like it, and who felt left out. So it's a hard, an executive committee, administrative executive committee, while it might be a good alternative, is not without challenges. So I would just caution you. My motion is that we disband this one. I'm not adding to my motion that we create that one.
All right. Mr. Robert?
And I did see the same thing. I think it is something that we will, or whomever is a part of it needs to be aware. With that said, I typically work better with criticism. I kind of have thick skin, so just putting that out there.
Okay. Mr. President?
I support the decision of, I want to say Chairwoman Casso.
That's okay, I'll answer
That's what I
that.
go to every time. I really believe you need to go back to the full council and amend what happened on January 23rd, 2020, because that's what was passed by the full council. We're not going to adhere to those wishes. We need to go back to the council. They can determine. They may want to have these discussions with all 11 members. I don't know. But I think they need to decide where we go from here. Because that vote was cast, and now either we follow it or we don't. And I think we need to go back and ask them again, is this what you really want to do or not?
Well, I think this could be a recommending body. I mean, I certainly think this committee could recommend to the full council, and the full council would consider it on its agenda to disband this negotiating committee and move forward in some other process, whatever that turned out to be. And the chair would put that on the agenda.
May I add one thing?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Discussions with less than quorums are allowed. I think the challenge we get into is when a document is produced. When a document is produced, that is owned by the parish. That's a public document. And so that document has to have sunshine. And the only thing I would suggest to this body is that there be an organized way that that's done, where everyone's put on notice. I'm sorry, Chairwoman.
May I ask why? Would a document produced by another entity become public when it's given to that body?
Yes.
Okay.
When
so-
that document is given to, see, the challenge we've got is NWI, not a public entity, not a public body.
Right.
We can't do a public records request from them. I mean, so what we're calling negotiations is not even because we are under constraints that they are not under.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, once it's in our custody, once it's given to us, especially if it's not generated through a request by, council has not asked that that be produced, yes, that becomes a public document at that point when it's in our custody and control, even if it's produced by them.
So let me ask this, Mr. Hardy. If we're dealing, say for instance, we enter negotiations with this or any other proposal we may receive, and if we go through our attorneys and those documents are submitted to our attorneys, would that, as long as we having those conversations with whatever body that council may decide that would do the negotiations, does that allow us to have those negotiations without all that information becoming public at that time?
Well, not if that's information that we're openly sharing with
I got
the council.
Okay.
I think it would be a challenge to argue that those are not public documents at that point.
Okay. Okay.
Now, there's some different, well, with respect, Mr. Councilman, there's some different Attorney General's opinions that kind of suggest you might be able to do that. What I'd like to do is take a thorough look at some of those, because it's not that this question has not come up before, as to when can you do things that don't necessarily have to meet open meetings and sunshine, and when are things not public documents. With the permission of this group, and maybe the entire council, I'd like to take a look at that and maybe can give you some assistance in what we put in place going forward to how this is done. Because there are some challenges because of that being a private company and this being a public entity.
All right. Mr. Brother?
Maybe I can add to that, if we can also take a look at all state laws that are represented in proposals, so that all state laws as well, in addition to those AG opinions. I think that would be a good idea moving forward.
Okay. Well, I have a motion by Councilwoman Cazo and second by Councilman Robert to disband the committee.
To recommend to the council. that it be
Recommend to the
disbanded.
council that the committee be disbanded. Any more discussion? Any objections? So ordered. Item 9 on the agenda. Oh, Mr. President, sorry.
Before we adjourn, could we maybe have that motion to request Mr. Hardy and Mr. Fleshman to do that instead of just us talking about it? We actually vote on them researching the AG's opinion and all state laws associated. We didn't vote on that. We kind of,
I think we could, but I think that's also something the administration can ask of our attorneys.
I'm just.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for the consideration, but I think that's well within your right to ask.
I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, meeting adjourned.